So, how does a boy from a tiny, impoverished village, a kid who was bullied and beaten, grow up to become one of the most feared dictators in modern history? The story of Saddam Hussein, well, it's not just a history lesson. It's a really chilling look at how ambition, when it's forged in hardship and fueled by paranoia, can create an absolute monster.
To strangle the life out of an entire nation? I mean, that's such a brutal, powerful phrase. And that's the grim end of this story. But to really get our heads around how one man could get that much power, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, a story like this never starts in a palace. It starts here, in a dusty, poor village, where the foundations for the man he would become were laid in cruelty and neglect.
Look at this list. This isn't just a tough childhood. It's practically a recipe for resentment. Poverty, violence, constant humiliation. It's a pattern you see over and over in the early lives of tyrants. Now look, plenty of people overcome beginnings like this, but for Saddam, it just lit this fire inside him, a burning need to control everything and everyone around him, to make sure he would never ever be powerless again. So when he's 20, Saddam finds the perfect outlet for all that ambition, the Ba'ath Party. And you gotta understand, this wasn't your typical political group. It was more like an ideological weapon. Their goal was absolute power, and they were ruthless about how they planned to get it. For a young man who already saw the world through a lens of violence, it was a perfect fit. But, the path to power is never a straight line. The Ba'ath Party's first attempt at a coup completely failed, and Saddam got himself thrown in prison. For most people, that would be the end of the road. But for Saddam, it was basically the start of his real education in how to be a tyrant.
He literally turned his prison cell into his own personal think tank. He didn't just sit there and do his time. He studied. He picked apart every mistake. And his conclusion was simple, but it was also brilliant in a terrifying way. Political parties are weak, and you can't ever trust the military. If you want real lasting power, you need an instrument of terror that is loyal to one person and one person only, you. He wasn't planning an escape. He was designing his future regime. The second he gets out, he puts that prison plan right into action. He becomes the fist for the Ba'ath Party's new leader, a guy named al-Bakr. So while al-Bakr was the face of the party, Saddam and his new security force were the brutal enforcers in the shadows, terrorizing Baghdad and picking off rivals one by one. So now he's the power behind the throne, right? He's the guy pulling all the strings. But for a man like Saddam, sharing power was never, ever the endgame. The final step was to get rid of the throne itself and become the one and only ruler of Iraq. The moment that forced his hand came in 1979. There was this proposal to unite Iraq with Syria. Now, to most people, it's just politics, but to Saddam, it was a direct threat to his existence. A union meant a whole new power structure, one that he didn't control from top to bottom. And after all those years of carefully building his network, there was no way he was going to let that happen. He moved fast and forced his own president to resign.
Okay, so he's got the presidency. He's the top dog. But power you take by force is never secure. He knew his rivals were in the wings, watching, waiting for him to slip up. So how do you make sure that loyalty is absolute?
His answer came just 6 days later. It was pure, calculated terror. He calls a big assembly of all the party's top leaders. Just imagine the scene. He gets up on stage, casually lights his cigarettes, and then he starts reading from a list of 68 names. A list of supposed traitors who were sitting right there in the room with him.
As he calls out each name, security guards grab the person and drag them out of the hall. But here's the masterstroke of evil genius. The entire thing was filmed. This wasn't just a purge, it was a performance. It was a televised message to the entire country, and especially to every single person left in that room. The message was simple. Loyalty isn't a choice anymore. Disloyalty means death. His rule was now absolute.
And with that absolute power came this reign of contradictions that would define Iraq for more than 2 decades. He was, at the same time, a modernizer and a complete monster.
I mean, this is straight out of the dictator's playbook. The modernizer side builds the roads, the schools, the hospitals, all the stuff that gives the regime this appearance of progress and keeps some of the people happy. But the tyrant side is busy building the secret police, the chemical weapons, and a massive personality cult to make sure that happiness never ever turns into dissent. One hand gives you free education, the other takes away your freedom. It's an incredibly calculated strategy of control.
So, with total control at home, he starts looking abroad. In 1980, he invades Iran, kicking off a horrible 8-year war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and sank Iraq in debt. And here's the great irony. A lot of Western nations actually backed him. They saw his dictatorship as a better option than Iran's new Islamic Republic, an alliance that they would definitely come to regret.
But a ruler who lives by violence so often ends by it. A series of really disastrous gambles would eventually bring his entire regime crashing down around him.
You can really see the dominoes falling here. The massive debt from the Iran war pushes him to make a desperate bet, invading Kuwait to steal its oil. And that one act of aggression is what turned him from a regional problem into an international enemy. It set off this whole chain reaction, the Gulf War, crippling sanctions, and then finally the 2003 invasion that sealed his fate. For a man who built this whole mythology around strength and martyrdom, the end was just deeply humiliating. He wasn't found in a palace making a last stand. He was found hiding in the hole in the ground, not far from where his whole story started. The great, powerful leader who terrorized millions just gave up without a fight, found with a pistol he never fired and a briefcase full of U.S. cash.
His trial was pretty much as chaotic and defiant as his rule had been, but the verdicts? That was inevitable. These charges, willful killing, torture, deportation, they weren't just abstract legal terms. They were a summary of the very tools he had used his entire life to build and hold on to his power.
The sentence was death, and on December 30th, 2006, the man who had strangled the life out of Iraq for decades was executed, bringing his brutal story to its final end. But his death leaves us with this huge, critical question. When a figure who has held a nation in an iron grip for that long is suddenly just gone, what comes next? What fills that void? Because the fall of a dictator is never really just an ending. It's always the beginning of a new and often a much more complicated chapter.